Hello, welcome to Tabletop Meetup and AltspaceVR. I'm Matt. I see a lot of familiar faces back, so thanks for coming again. And tonight's topic is going to be one that I think a lot of people were pretty excited about, and that's tabletop RPGs. Ever since I've been doing this, every week someone asks, when are we going to talk about RPGs? When are we going to talk about D&D? Well, tonight's the night, and this is the opportunity for all of us to talk about our favorite RPGs and talk about, our great experiences playing D&D and other RPG systems. So just a quick little summary of where we're going tonight. First off, there's a few announcements, and there's a pretty exciting one actually tonight. I don't want to pump it up too much, but it's pretty big news here in Altspace. So as far as gaming goes, so I'll cover that. Then we're going to go through our main discussion topic, which tonight is tabletop RPGs, and it's hard to talk about tabletop RPGs without talking a lot about Dungeons and Dragons, right? I mean, the two things are totally synonymous at this point, and let's all talk about our favorite other games as well and our favorite moments, but we'll get there. And then finally, after we go through kind of the discussion, I thought that some of us, if we're interested, we can take a look at the D&D room here, because one thing I want to talk about is how we can get games going in Altspace again. They've got a really nice platform for playing Dungeons and Dragons here. Theoretically, you could actually use whatever RPG system you wanted, I suppose, but in the fantasy regime, but it's definitely set up for D&D 5th edition. And we'll go over and have a look at it. So let's just jump right into it. Our friend Yoster's here again. We all really appreciate him streaming this to the interwebs through YouTube, so that folks who can't make it here physically in the 3 dimensions can watch us on a screen. And also all of these events are archived there, so if you ever want to go back and view this one or any previous session, they're there for you. And I guess the last bit of notice is, we're streaming this, we're recording it, so just be aware of that, because you don't want to say something you don't want to have on YouTube. I highly recommend going to check out the Hive VR channel on YouTube. I think everyone here probably knows who Vivian is. Vivian is kind of aggregating a lot of content from the Hive contributors there, and it's a really good place to go check out not just tabletop stuff, but book club and the episodes of the Hive, which is really kind of a nice general topic talk show that goes on here in AltspaceVR. So, this week is this is the place to play games. This is the place to talk about games, learn about new games, meet people who play the kind of games that you like to play, and arrange times to play them. So, this is your gaming group in VR. And, it's not my gaming group, it's everybody's gaming group. It's here. So, if we're not talking about the kind of games you're interested in, or if you want to bring something else up, let me know, or we can make sure that we bring it on into this community here. Okay, so this slide, every time I show it, has this image down here in the corner of me and Ben and Leah and some other folks here that you might recognize playing this game, right? So we've been joking about secret what a lot of people don't know, but the name needed to change in this game, just because the theming wasn't something that would really be appropriate, I guess, for all audiences. And it was unclear when it was going to get renamed and when we were going to be able to play it out in the public. Well, the exciting news tonight is that it is ready. And if I had like a drum roll sound, I'd play it. But what they have decided to call it is Secret Caesar, which is actually a pretty good idea because, anybody who's familiar with Roman history knows kind of there's some similarities between this particular theme and the theme that the game is based on. So I think it's a really good idea. I heard there's all new artwork and so forth. So the game is ready to go. And I talked to Steven, and he wants to debut it next week here in part of our club here. And it's perfect because totally coincidentally, for a month, I've had scheduled 2 topics for next week. The first one, because it's Halloween next Tuesday, spooky games. The second thing was social deduction because of werewolf, right? That's kind of like the link there. But this is a fantastic social deduction game in the werewolf style. Hey Steve, how you doing? Could you give me a little bit of space here so that I could present, sir? But it's a very good social deduction game in the werewolf family, and we're gonna have a chance to try it out and play it next week, and I'm really excited. I love it. I don't know how many games of this I've played already, and I think everybody else is going to be really excited about playing it too. So come on back next week, and we'll have the excitement of a new game that's going to be available to us in Altspace from that day forward. So just so guest, if you don't mind, this is the stage that everyone's kind of viewing. If you could please step aside so that people could see. All right, gonna kick you 3, 2,
poor guest is confused.
1. All right, I think he's all right. He's got it now. All right. So so these are the upcoming and past meetups. So we've been going through what I've been calling the pillars of tabletop gaming. So board games, card games. Tonight we're going to do RPGs, which I know is one that people have been waiting for a while. A brief diversion next week to do the social deduction with Secret Caesar. Then we're going to finish things up for the pillars with CCGs, miniatures, and war games, just kind of a catch-all for other stuff. Sorry for anybody who's really into that stuff, but I just wanted to hammer those out quickly. We can come back to those in more detail later. And then we're gonna kind of the only other major announcement I think is that I'm taking the week of the 21st off because I can't do this every week. And then after that, though, we've got another exciting one where we're going to talk about Kickstarter and entrepreneurism, how that's really kind of had an effect on gaming in the 21st century, and how it's created a lot of innovation. And to support that, Chris O'Neill, who made a game called Boss Monster, which there's a really great implementation of here in Altspace. He's going to come in and he's going to talk about, the topic of Kickstarter and kind of how he used that to really bring his dream to life and his thoughts on how Kickstarter has really contributed to today's gaming renaissance. And then we'll play Boss Monster, and we'll actually have the designer here to help teach it. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So there's some really exciting events coming up, and I just kind of wanted to run down where we're going just so you guys know. We're going to continue to alternate. So all the days you see up here in purple are going to be at 9, which is this time slot, and then that's going to be alternated with the earlier time slot at 6 p.m. These are all in Eastern time zone, and that'll be more European friendly. All right, so
I have a question. Just
sure. Yes.
I'm new here. This is my first time in Altspace. How long does this event go on for?
Hi, Jamie. Nice.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. So the event is scheduled to go till 10:30. I expect the discussion to go until about 10, at which point we're going to head over to the D&D space, and
I was just asking because I get home from work at around 7. So on the days when it starts at 6, I was curious if I'd still have time to.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely worth popping in. By that time, generally, we'll be moving on to our field trip or our group activity at that point. So, yeah. So, I mean, you should still pop in. I mean, sometimes it goes way longer than it's scheduled for. So,
all right. Thank you.
Yeah. And even if there's nothing going on here, there's certainly something going on in Altspace. So it's always good to pop in.
For sure.
All right. So, we have a Board Game Geek Guild. So I keep trying to get people to join here. Please do. It's our discussion forum. And we do have some people signed up now, so thank you for those who have joined there. The only reason I'm trying to drive everybody towards this is just so that we have a place to coordinate. But here's a question for you all. Is the reason nobody is signing up for this is because it's an outdated method of communication? It's been suggested to me. Is it better if we go to a Discord? Show of hands, who thinks that's a better idea? 2. Okay. Oh, 3, 4. All right. 5. Okay. Here come the hands. I am going to make a Discord then. More to come. All right. And the nice thing about Discord, of course, is it's more interactive. We can get a chat going. We can share things on there a little bit easier. I like it. Let's do it. And we can use it for voice chat too when we go in and play games on other platforms. I like it. Discord, here we come. All right. Next topic, I'm not going to spend too much time here because we've got a ton to go through with the RPG stuff. But I just wanted to mention that the first field trip, the first like big field trip, like actually outside of the friendly confines of AltSpace, I want to do is I want to get a group of us to go into Tabletop Simulator. I know there's quite a few people who are excited about this, but we've had a hard time kind of getting it together. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait till we establish Discord to do this now. I tried to do the first event with the European cohort, and it was difficult to coordinate it. So let's get the Discord going, and then we'll try this again. But I just wanted to continue to build awareness for Tabletop Simulator and the fact that this is a platform that some of us are already very interested and very engaged with, and we want to bring more people in playing games there, including RPGs, right? I mean, I think John, this is your favorite place to play RPGs online, right? You prefer Tabletop Simulator. Yeah. So, I mean, it's really a great platform for all kinds of gaming. So just a notification to know that's something we're going to be using going forward. Any questions on Tabletop Simulator? Everybody pretty familiar with it after being here a bunch of times and just being gamers in general. Questions? I see a hand there from the guest, and then Jamie. Jamie, why don't you start?
No, we were just interacting with each other.
Okay, cool. Awesome. All right.
The VR boom coming.
I'm sorry?
Like the .com bust. I see the VR bust coming.
Okay. So, tonight's topic is tabletop RPGs, and I'm just going to get a couple disclaimers out right off the top. The first one, I am not an expert on this topic. I think you probably got a flavor from the last 2 weeks. I had quite a bit of experience with board games, quite a bit of experience with card games. I have infinitely less experience playing tabletop RPGs. But I thought it was an incredibly important topic, and I feel like tabletop RPGs actually may be the most influential genre of gaming overall on tabletop today. I say that as a board gamer. When I look at what has created today's board games, I don't know that really there's been any, maybe Euro game design has had as much of an influence as kind of the principles of tabletop RPGs. But in addition to it being really important, I know it's one of the big interests of the AltSpace community is getting tabletop RPGs back on the agenda here, getting games going, getting people meeting, chucking dice and adventuring with their friends. And I really want to help connect people and make that happen. Also, I would like to fix the problem that I haven't had a great exposure to tabletop RPGs. And I'm hoping that through this community, I can experience those things and I can fix that. So that's really my motivations here. So that said, I did put together a short presentation to kind of kick this off. And this disclaimer here, I think, is actually a really kind of cool disclaimer. RPGs, by their entire nature, are oral traditions, right? We have the printed page that tells us the rules, that tells us the background source material that we use to create the adventures, to create the characters, and create the stories that the groups are going to tell together. But in reality, that's not the whole story. The whole story includes these groups of people getting together in their basements and their garages and their living rooms, gathering around the table and kind of collaboratively telling a story together. So it's the definitive oral tradition. So the general overview I'm going to give is only one piece of the puzzle. What's way more important are the experiences that you guys have had, opening up those source books, pulling out that DM screen, chucking those dice, making things happen. That's what's really important, and that's what I really want to get to instead of going through a big, long history or kind of overview of tabletop RPGs. So I think any discussion has to start with Dungeons & Dragons. There were games that were RPG-like before Dungeons & Dragons, but really the modern tabletop RPG, as we would recognize it today, really started with this game, the product of Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. Came out, the first edition, in 1974. Gygax was a war gamer, actually. He developed tabletop simulation-type war games, which, for those who aren't familiar with that genre, are kind of like those really crunchy cardboard chits on a hex board type of thing, where you're actually simulating historical battles with units and kind of like large-scale conflicts. And what he and Arneson kind of got together to do was to take this idea, the idea of conflict and the idea of a battle, and personalize it. So get it away from like this big, broad, sweeping, epic battlefield type scenario, and instead make it something personal, where you have the lone warrior and his companions going off to fight kind of all-powerful mystical foes. And the company that they started was called Tactical Studies Rules, which is actually was originally started to sell war games. But TSR, of course, is way more famous as being the first publisher of the Dungeons and Dragons system of tabletop RPGs. And it cannot be overstated enough. So there's so many things that we take for granted today that would not exist without D&D. Classes and archetypes, the idea of picking a character, picking a class and a race. Think about, booting up Skyrim for the first time and the choices you're confronted with. That whole concept was invented by D&D. It didn't exist in that form before this game came out. So its influence is felt not just throughout tabletop RPGs, but really throughout gaming, in all media. That cannot be stated enough. It's one of those things that's almost so influential we can't understand its influence anymore. Just because it's so permeated various different types of media. D&D, of course, is probably more popular than it's ever been today. I think that's probably a surprise to a lot of people because for a variety of factors, there was a bit of a lull in a few decades in the past. Wizards of the Coast, the creators, or I should say the publishers of Magic the Gathering as well, has kind of come into the ownership of the Dungeons and Dragons brand, and they've really done an outstanding job with it. There were some uncomfortable times, and we'll go through those, but today it's one of the most powerful brands in gaming. And it's really, creating a great entry point for people to get into gaming. Okay, so just a few big dates. I'm not going to bore everybody with a lot of history, but just to kind of set some things up and talk about some points of general interest. So, as I mentioned, 1974 was when it all began, but really the rules would not be something that probably your typical D&D gamer would recognize until you get to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which is 1977. Which is kind of the first rule set that was fully formed in a way that a modern gamer could probably relate to. Still quite different, I believe, from what we have today in Dungeons & Dragons, but at the same time, still very relatable. People still play this game today in pretty significant numbers. There's still a strong attachment to the original rule set for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and we'll talk about that as we go through. There's been many variations of the game that still have a following today. The 1980s is where I come into this story. What I knew about Dungeons and Dragons when I was a kid was that people were panicking. They were acting crazy. They were thinking that people were being seduced into a life of Satanism through this game. It's called the Satanic Panic. That was a phenomenon that was most strongly felt in North America, particularly the United States. Where a lot of conservative factors were leading to people getting the wrong idea about Dungeons and Dragons. There's been actually a lot of writing done about this time in history in the last 10 years. A lot of people just believe that the idea of this personal journey that someone goes on, this kind of like vivid personal journey, fighting these mystical creatures, that it was just such a weird concept for people who were coming in from the outside that it actually looked like it was some sort of cultish type practice to them, right? And some people got some really strange ideas that kids were playing D&D in their basement and then they were going out and committing ritual suicide and all sorts of strange stuff. So the funny thing about the Satanic Panic is that it had both positive and negative effects on the brand. In some circles, it led to parents kind of taking the source books away, and saying, kids, you can't play. And in other circles, it led to kids kind of hiding those source books and kind of getting more and more excited about it, and getting deeper and deeper because maybe it made it feel a little bit more dangerous and a little bit more, kind of on the edge. So it had kind of a mixed bag effect on the reputation of the game. But regardless, it certainly survived that. The 80s were a great time for Dungeons and Dragons. When I was growing up, there was a Dungeons and Dragons cartoon I remember watching on Saturday mornings. We kind of had the first expansion of the brand over all media, really. It was quite a peak time, one of the two peak times, I would say. In 1997 wasn't such a great time for the Dungeons and Dragons brand. Admittedly, people were still playing the game, but TSR had gotten themselves into some financial difficulties, and it became necessary to kind of sell the brand, and that's when Wizards came into the picture. In the late 90s and the 2000s, things really started to get chaotic because there were multiple rule sets where you had different groups supporting 4th edition, different groups supporting 3rd edition, and what it led to is what people call the edition wars, or the idea of gamers that were favoring one version of the game over others. And out of that actually came something that was probably a good thing for a lot of D&D players, and I know at least one D&D player here who would say so, and that's Pathfinder, which was a system that exploited the fact that Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition was somewhat open source, which was probably not the greatest idea for them in the end, but ended up creating Pathfinder, which is a system that now coexists and creates kind of an alternative, and in some situations maybe a concurrent interest for a lot of players who actually like both games. So today we're in the 5th edition of D&D. Just absolutely jaw-dropping art. I don't know if anybody has seen the 5th edition art. I think it's maybe the best fantasy art I've ever seen in my life. But it also is a way to maybe join together the best aspects of some of the previous generations of D&D. The big focus is taking the more complicated rules that started to become common started in 4th edition and join those with the storytelling of the good old days, where it was more narrative focused. And they tried to strike a balance. It seems to be working. I'm not one to evaluate this, but I can tell you, at Origins, there's an intense amount of D&D being played these days. Okay, so we talked a lot about D&D, but D&D is not the world, right? I mean, there's tons, there's hundreds, there's thousands of different RPG games that are out there. I just highlighted some of the more common ones here. A lot of them, like Pathfinder, use kind of a similar fantasy setting. In some cases, a direct kind of an analogy to the D&D system and world. There's completely different types of themes. There's sci-fi themes. There's a lot of licensed themes out there, right? There's a lot of popular Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, superhero-based RPG systems, The Lord of the Rings. Pretty much almost any major geek IP at this point has at least one RPG system in its history. And also kind of some more public domain type ideas like Lovecraft, so Call of Cthulhu, things that are really quite different like Fiasco. And also just completely different types of gaming brought in, like Warhammer, right? So a miniatures game represented as a fantasy setting RPG. So I guess I just wanted to kind of stop at this point and just go around the room. So what RPG systems is everybody playing here? I mean, do we have a lot of D&D faithful, or are folks kind of interested in some of the other systems, or maybe even some of like the little indie games that maybe the public doesn't know about? Anybody have a game they want to talk about that they really like? No? Trey.
I don't feel like I have to say anything.
I have one. I mean, it kind of falls in the role-playing game. And I come up here. 1 second. And it's a Star Wars Rebellion, if you've heard of it.
Rebellion? Do you mean the board game?
Yeah.
Rebellion?
Yeah.
I played it. I played it 2 days ago, actually. So
Did
yeah,
you
so
really?
I'm very familiar with it.
It kind of
yeah.
like, I like it because it falls in the role-playing, because you get the Empire versus Rebellion, and then you get the leaders, and you can send them missions.
Thank you. You're actually getting back to all this right now. Games that we exist about RPGs. you can look at sending the cat. Do you feel like it's still kind of holding true to its roots a little bit?
Oh well, it keeps expanding itself. Rules do adjust a little bit, but mostly it keeps true to the 3.5 feel. But ultimately, I would say the biggest difference with Pathfinder is it's a different world, a different kind of feel about it. Whereas D&D takes itself really seriously. Most of the time, the storylines are dark, their storylines are serious that they have pre-generated, or the world itself. Whereas Pathfinder, it has all that. It then has this random bit of don't put that close. Then it'll have a random. Oh, you bastard! Fine, I'm gonna make you chase me. But then Pathfinder will have kind of that edge to it that makes it a little bit entertaining as well. I mean, it's a little bit goofy at times, a little bit doesn't take itself too seriously. Gives you an opportunity to goof around a little bit. I don't know if anyone's either heard this routine or at least has played D&D before, but there's always that joke that no matter how serious you start a campaign, you're always going to end up like Monty Python in the Holy Grail, no matter what. So I feel like Pathfinder just goes ahead and embraces that a little bit sometimes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I guess that's all we have on. Might be a short discussion tonight. Okay. So I think John has already started to. Oh, Mike, did you have something you want to say? Did I?
Yeah, I was gonna say I have friends of mine that do D&D both over Skype and just in a regular chat app. Like they don't necessarily gather in person, but they're such big fans of the game that they'll just do it over voice, over Skype, or like I said, just in a chat room. So it seems like it's a very versatile game that's able to be played across many different mediums,
Well, you actually have people who are kind of purists, and they like the freedom of the game so much that they will refuse to play with miniatures or even a map or anything like that. And they depend purely on their dungeon master describing every single detail to them, talking to them.
That's what
and pretty much storytelling. You gotta keep in mind that D&D, while still being considered a tabletop RPG, doesn't necessarily require the tabletop all the time. And half the time it's just discussing what's going on, forming a story together.
So John made me think of
RPGs.
John made me think of a story actually, because I'm a board gamer. I've talked about that a bunch of times, and before the days of 5th edition, so this was in late 4th edition era. I was hanging out in one of my board game stores, and someone came. We were talking about our interests, and he let me know, oh, I'm an RPG guy. I'm not a board gamer. And he's like, but you board gamers ruin Dungeons and Dragons because they've turned Dungeons and Dragons into a board game. He was really upset. I guess 4th edition had really kind of emphasized the grid and whatnot. So there is a lot of tension within the RPG community about taking the focus away from the narrative and from being the group around the table, kind of chatting and role playing and having a good time in your quest. And instead of turning it into like a tactical experience. So there's always been a healthy tension there, I think, in Dungeons and Dragons and any board game system.
I would like to say real quick, that person's actually wrong. It's computer games that ruined 4th edition more than board games, because the whole purpose on their system changes that they incorporated in 4th edition was mostly to eventually target transfer over to more of a digital aspect instead of the board game medium, or easily go in between. But
see.
they got such flack that they never got around to that. But they're starting to do steps now with 5th edition, since they were able to start it from scratch again. You'll see, like, they just released, I think, their digital tools for 5th edition, I believe.
Right.
Yeah. I wouldn't say the board games ruined it.
Thank you, John. You're setting my mind at ease. I did not ruin tabletop RPGs. I can sleep easy tonight.
Those changes came
so
in 3rd edition.
what's that?
Those changes came in 3rd edition. They just
Oh.
didn't notice.
Yeah. Got to know where to take the blame. So we started to talk about this, and I think we're kind of heading that direction. So maybe if there's not a whole lot of interest to talk through these points, I'll just completely improvise and we'll go through it. But I did a little bit of research, and there's a wide variety of RPGs, and it seems like and John, feel free to shout out if I'm wrong about this, but it seems like a lot of people think of it like as a spectrum, rules-based RPGs and then narrative-based RPGs, and you're somewhere on that spectrum. There's a lot of people who want to be in the sweet spot between the two. There's some folks who don't care at all about rules. Like, I mean, right now I'm trying to learn how to GM the Doctor Who role-playing game. Like, the rules don't matter at all in that game. You just completely just make everything up. I mean, the rules are kind of there, but at the same time, if you really want to, you can just completely pull the rug out from everything, and it's kind of set up for you to do that. But then you have really crunchy RPGs that maintain strong ties to the you could believe that this is a form of gaming that came out of wargaming, with all kinds of tables with of results for all sorts of different tests that you can do. So does anybody have any thoughts or any feelings about where they like to be on that spectrum, or any other factors I haven't talked about?
I just would like to mention one. You didn't mention it, but it's been around for about a little over 20 years now. 30 years now, I think. Brought out by Steve Jackson Games, called Gurps, which is kind of a generic universal role-playing system. And it's supposed to be completely story told, like very loose rules. It doesn't even have a general setting. It just whatever setting you want, sci-fi, fantasy, whatever. That would be probably what you would go for if you want to talk about your most story-driven type roleplay, as in less rule-based. But it's one I would like to suggest to people if you are interested in it. Gurps.
So do they actually
Gurps?
So do they actually publish source books, or are they just like you can use whatever you want for your source, essentially?
Well, Steve Jackson Games, I'm 100% certain that they have some publishing for it. I've never actually looked for it, but like I said,
Cool.
Steve Jackson Games, they're known for publishing anything they want. Munchkin and all that.
Sure, yeah. Obviously, a great company. They even make Euro games now. They're crazy. They make a little bit of everything. All right, so we've already talked about that well enough, but I want to go here because one of the characteristics of almost all RPGs have some notion of a GM/DM. Although interestingly enough, there's games now where the separation between the person facilitating the game and the players playing the game is a little bit fuzzy. I'll use the Doctor Who tabletop RPG as an example. There's no reason the GM cannot play the game, and in fact, I've heard it works better that way when you have the GM actually participate as one of the players in the game. So there isn't necessarily that screen anymore between that you think of in D&D. But most of the games do have this notion of the person whose role is to facilitate the game for the other players. What makes a good GM? What makes a good DM? What are the skills that we think we need this person to most have to do a good job and to create a situation where we have fun? Is it about imagination, or is it about like really understanding the game inside and out? John, I think you have an answer to that question.
I do, and I would say the number one thing that I would say a GM would need is the ability and willingness to make an ass of themselves. And I am not even kidding about that. Yeah, it's pretty much being able to just not be so caught up in the details, being able to relax, have fun with your friends, and just, if you mess up, roll with it. Ultimately, knowing the people thinking that they need to know the rules in and out perfectly is what keeps a lot of people from forming groups and keeping
Right.
people from actually GMing. And that stuff comes in time, but it's not absolutely essential to running the game. It helps.
Right. And I suppose it probably depends upon your group as well. I imagine that you wouldn't want to match a player who understands the rule book inside and out with a GM who does not. That could probably create some tension, I would imagine. But that's great insight. Thank you, John. Ghoster, looks like you want to get in on this.
Yeah, so a good quality of a GM/DM is definitely going to be creativity and adaptability. Because you never know what your players are going to do, and you never know how they're going to act. You can only guesstimate and try to lead them in certain directions, but sometimes even that leading will not get you where you want to go. And they'll just go and run their own path that they want. It's basically like herding sheep, but the sheep have ADD, and they just kind of go wherever.
So herding cats.
Yes, that's a better one. I like that.
Yeah.
Matt, I'd like to say something.
Sheep go where you want.
If
Yes,
anyone's
Brian.
watching Critical Role on YouTube, they just finished their 106th episode. Matthew Mercer is the dungeon master, and he has got together about 6 or 7 voice actors, and they're all level 20 right now, and they're going up against Vecna, which is a god-like figure, and they're almost done with their story. But that's a great example if people want to see what some people can do with Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Ryan, because that's a Geek and Sundry thing, right? Is that Geek and
Yes.
Sundry?
Yes, it's definitely worth watching. It's 4 hours an episode, but it's worth it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think that really says a lot about tabletop RPGs, right? That there's an audience on YouTube to sit and watch a 4-hour program of people playing, a game with with limited visuals. I mean, I think they use miniatures on Critical Role.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, they're just voice actors, kind of improvising almost like a radio play of a D&D game. So I think it says a lot about how powerful the storytelling can be that people want to watch this in YouTube. And I mean, it is, I haven't sat down and watched the whole episode, but I have enjoyed the bits of it that I have been able to see. So thank you for that.
The best
Yep.
thing about it is they all do it on the fly.
Right.
They all do the show on the fly. They make things up as they go, and Matt takes what they give him, and he makes the best story he can with it. He knows how it's going to end, but they let the actors do the acting, and it's really neat to watch.
Now, do you play RPGs yourself, Brian?
I've played once when I was young, but I don't
Okay.
play RPGs.
But watching
much
Critical Role, does
anymore.
that make you want to try? Like, does that
Uh,
so? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yes and no. I'm into Marvel Puzzle Quest right now, which is
Okay.
a card game online, and that takes a lot of my time.
I see.
Yeah.
Right. So you're more into like abstract type puzzle games. Yeah,
Right.
cool.
It's a match 3 game
Uh-huh.
around Marvel characters.
You know what, Brian? You're putting out a deficiency in my programming. I need to cover abstract strategy games.
I'm sorry.
I have not scheduled a time for that, and that is like a big oversight because that's like the original type of board game. So
Yeah.
it probably deserves its own session.
Yes. It's like Candy Crush with Marvel characters.
Cool.
Yeah.
Now, I would like to mention one of the downsides about watching those almost professional level D&D players is that can make it a little bit intimidating for other people to start it sometimes. Like I've heard disclaimers that, listen, do not expect to be as good as Matt Mercer. You'll discourage yourself right out the bat doing stuff like that.
Right. He's
So when
very
you watch
good.
it, you got to keep that kind of stuff in mind. You know, don't expect to be like that without a lot of practice.
Indeed. So, I get the sense that maybe, a lot of the attendees here don't have a ton of experience with tabletop RPGs, but maybe those who do, does anybody have any like memories they want to share of like, really great games or, really great experiences they had with their friends? Just because, like I said in my disclaimer at the beginning, the source books, the miniatures you put on the table, the statistics, the dice, all of that stuff is just to facilitate the narrative, right? So like the really important thing are the stories that are told and the interactions that occur. Does anybody have like any great memories or anything that they want to bring up from their experiences playing games together with their friends and maybe strangers at conventions? John?
Well, we were playing a little thing one time. I was GMing this game, and my wife, she was playing a witch. So, decided to throw in an animated cauldron that managed to swallow her and knock her out inside of it. So.
Nice. That's fun.
Oh yeah.
I mean, how does that affect the game? So like I imagine that really has to add something when you play it with, someone you're so close to, like your partner, right? Like there's a whole subtext that develops.
Oh yeah,
when...
you're not afraid to go overboard and make them hate you a little bit.
Right. It's especially, I guess, a unique situation when you're kind of controlling their world, right? As the DM or the GM.
Yeah. To an extent.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, so I've got a thing going on with my partner right now where we're both kind of simultaneously trying to learn the Doctor Who RPG system. It's like whoever finishes and feels confident enough and calls the first game is going to be the one running the game. Like, and I can't decide if we both want that power or if we're both afraid of it or what. But like neither of us have gotten there yet, so it feels like we're in our second year of trying to do this. But someday. Anybody else have any experiences or anything they want to share, or should we just? I'm glad I had something else prepared, because it looks like the conversation is going to be a little short tonight. All right, cool.
I took on an entire armada of kobolds with nothing but a +2 longsword, and it had a flame tongue, and I did it all by myself in an 18-sided dice.
All right.
Thank you, Sloan.
Wipe them pig-looking pricks out.
Must be
And
slow.
I would say this is probably a good example of a current problem. There's obviously people interested, but it's so hard to get into
My
it.
God.
It's hard to find the
Tank
person to
medical
run the games.
research
It's hard to
for
find the
Trip 10.
willingness to run a game.
Right.
Probably the hardest part about it.
All right. So just in case the conversation was short, I did one of my top threes like I normally do, about something I actually do know about, which is other types of tabletop games. And I'm not just saying this to be, gung ho because it's RPG night. I really do think that RPGs might be the most important thing to happen in gaming this century. I think they've done a lot for board games and other types of tabletop games. Here's an example of a game that stole pretty liberally, actually, I would say, from the concept of the tabletop RPG. Although it turned it back into a board game or like a tactical, almost like small scale war game, I guess you could say. Descent, second edition here. Great game, Fantasy Flight, a dungeon crawl game that kind of recreates just the combat part of an RPG. No notion of really role playing. I mean, you are a character, you are of a class, you do acquire items and use magic spells, but really you're fighting monsters in a very tactical fashion, very crunchy. There's still dice, but this is not necessarily someone trying to create a narrative experience for you. Instead, it is one versus many. You still have one person that the other players compete against, but as a board game. And the big innovation of Descent, and the reason I wanted to highlight this, because I feel like this is when one versus many board games really crystallized. This is the first game I ever played that was one versus many, where the dungeon lord or the overlord did not have to behave like a DM. So what I mean by that is in an RPG, you're generally, when you're, I don't know how John that runs his games, but you're generally not just trying to kill everybody as fast as you can, right? That's not your goal. You're trying to create a positive experience for the people that are playing the game. But in Descent Second Edition, you can try to kill the players as fast as you can. It's balanced such that the overlord can go as hard as they want at the adventurers coming into the dungeon, and that's awesome.
Oh yeah, you have to. You hold back for a turn or two at best, and no, they went automatically. There's no chance for you at that point to hold back.
So I mean, it's just such a great game. You know, I know both of us really like it, and there was a couple of folks at the last 6 o'clock meetup, I think, that really liked. There's a Star Wars version of this game called Star Wars Imperial Assault. That's actually the one I play the most often. Pretty amazing retheming of this game. So anyway, this is the number one thing that I think that games today, or I should say the number 3 thing that I'm listing off here, that I think that tabletop RPGs have kind of fed back into other styles of games. The second big one here are the conventions themselves. So Gen Con started off, it was owned by TSR actually in the early days. It was a wargaming convention, but pretty quickly Dungeons and Dragons came about, and that's all Gen Con was. I mean, it was just tables after tables after tables of people playing Dungeons and Dragons and other early RPGs. Now, people think of Gen Con today more as a board game con, but there's still lots of role-playing going on there. Origins kind of had a similar trajectory, maybe even more of an RPG convention. Origins is basically Dungeons and Dragons' key event of the year. It's a lot of fun to just go there and walk around the D&D area and get your free bag of holding and all your other free D&D loot, and check out all the new products and all the awesome new art that they've generated. But really today, the modern network of gaming conventions that we have all over North America really probably can be traced back to role-playing. I think it's a little bit different in Europe, where board gaming has a more continuous tradition, but really our conventions today, with a few noted exceptions, including the one that's on the left here, that's BGG Con. That was not ever an RPG convention. You might see one table of RPGs, the whole thing, but the rest, like that's Origins over there. The cons really are a product of role-playing games, and the fact that people wanted to get together and play D&D and all the other great RPGs. And then the number one thing that I think that gaming has taken from tabletop RPGs are narrative themes, right? So Brian, who moved over there, brought up his abstract strategy game, right? That's what games used to be. They used to be chessboards and checkerboards and you know, marbles and little wooden tokens, and there was no story there. RPGs changed all of that, and today we have these awesome games like Gloomhaven and Pandemic Legacy, which are so they're number 1 and number 4 respective all time on the BGG vote. Super thick with theme, you know. So, and both of these also are what you call legacy style games, which means that the place you leave things. So in Pandemic Legacy, you're trying to cure 4 horrible diseases from the entire world, and where you leave off
Altspace right now.
Exactly.
So
it was
we're
kind of
gonna-
like a. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, please go ahead. No, I interrupted you.
No, it was kind of like a trial by fire. We just went and just made stuff up. So I felt like it was underused until I went back and I spent more like hours trying to figure out what was available. But
So
at
have
the
you
time
watched the
with
video?
my party, it wasn't good.
Have you watched
no,
the
I haven't.
video?
No, I haven't.
Okay,
watched
so
it.
we're gonna watch it here in a second. I think it's actually
Sure.
the best documentation they have of how it works.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I agree. I mean, I spent about an hour and a half in preparation for this, just messing around with the thing. And then I saw the video, and I think it explained to me all the stuff that I figured out.
Okay.
But anyway, if there's no other conversation, I think I'll paste the link in here to the YouTube video. It's pretty short. It's only like maybe 5 minutes. But I think it'll answer a lot of basic questions about what's possible inside Altspace's D&D. So can everybody see the video first off?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Nope.
Yep.
Nope.
Yes.
Yeah, starting.
Yeah.
Just play.
Okay. I'm going to.
Yusuf.
What?
Turn around.
WTH.
Matt, you muted yourself, Matt.
You can't see the video?
It's up there, but it's not playing.
It's not playing.
Great. Well then.
Epic
No video.
fail.
No video for us. I feel like
Just remember this
synchronization has changed.
title.
What's that?
Just remember that title, everybody. How to play
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons in AltspaceVR.
No, sorry about that, folks. This worked last week. Feels like synchronization is changing here by the day. So, all right. I think with that, we are at 10 o'clock. Does anybody else have anything they want to add to the conversation before we move into the field trip phase of this thing? Okay. All right. Well, I guess at this point, I'll just say thank you for everyone joining. We're going to cut the stream off at this point because this is the end of the presentation. Next week, as I mentioned, it's a big meetup. Secret Caesar is going to be released by Altspace. It's a new game we're going to have here, a really cool social deduction game. So in addition to talking about spooky games, talking about social deduction games in general, we're going to play the new game. Steven from Altspace should be here as well to show it off and answer any questions people have about it. And it's a really exciting debut. So anyway, I'll see everyone next week. Thanks to Ghosta for streaming. Thanks to anybody joining on the Hive on YouTube. And we'll catch up with you at future events. All right. So that's it for the stream. Anybody who is interested, we're going to go over into an activity that I'm about to launch right now. So if you go into your Altspace menu and look under the open activities, in a short time, you're going to see a D&D activity open up.